Yo, so today I'm going to be doing my end of year reading wrap up. I know I have 2 weeks left of 2020 to get through, but I've basically come to the end of my TBR. I just have the Goldfinch and War and Peace left to read, and I'm going to be starting the Goldfinch soon. So I'm going to be doing a best books of 2020. So like if those books are amazing, I'll be talking to you about them then. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to get this video over and done with while I'm still retaining all the information about these books. And also I didn't do an autumn reading wrap up because it was just a horrible period. Like I didn't do as much reading as I had anticipated that I would be doing. Partly because the library is completely shut down here due to the level 5 that Ireland was placed under for 6 weeks, which we just came out of like a week or two ago. I was kind of disappointed with my level of reading, but then again, when I picked up all these books for doing the thumbnail of this video, I was like, I read a lot of big books, so I shouldn't really be that hard on myself. Before I get into chatting your ear off about all these books that I read, I just want to tell you that today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that have thousands of classes for people that are curious about discovering new skills, want to improve existing skills, or just need the inspiration to get into the mindset to create something new. With classes on creative writing, film and video production, music production, graphic design, crafts, and many, many more, there's something for everyone, and you'll be introduced to a community of millions and be offered feedback on the work that you create within these classes. So if you've been watching any of my recent videos, you'll know that I've been really enjoying the personal development classes that Skillshare offers, as I can find it hard to be a self-starter and to get myself motivated. And I've also been really wanting to get back into journaling, so I've been watching Writing for Self-Discovery, 6 Journaling Prompts for Gratitude and Growth by Yasmin Cheyenne, and this class lets you explore different methods of journaling in order to find what suits you best. So it's all about promoting self-care through journaling in order to relieve ourselves of the stresses of our daily lives, which is a very beneficial habit to get into if you can. And as Skillshare is curated for learning, there are no ads and they're continuously launching new classes, so you always have something new to watch. And it's also affordable with being less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. And with the holiday season quickly approaching, it's also a great gift idea. So if you're someone who wants to be more sustainable in your gift giving this year in order to cut down on packaging, or if you know someone in your life who you feel could really utilize what Skillshare offers, as there are still plenty of people who enjoy using the new year as a reset button in order to get into new routines or start new hobbies. And the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description box below will receive a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, so you can all test it out, explore your creativity, and see if it is something that you'd be interested in giving as a gift this year. Thank you so much for all of your support in supporting my channel. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Okie dokie, now let's get into the books. So the first book that I picked up over the autumn period was The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. So if you are new here, I have basically been talking about rereading the Lord of the Rings series probably for the past 5 years. And this year was the year that I actually started doing it. So it started with rereading The Hobbit earlier this year, which I really, really enjoyed. I just read it in like one sort of long binge session within like 6 or 7 hours one day. Loved it. And I was thinking that my reading experience for this would be kind of similar. However, I found that when I was reading this, I was reading it a lot slower than I would have been if I'd gone in kind of completely fresh. I don't know. But what was interesting is that my timeline for the events in The Lord of the Rings is completely off. Like there's so much stuff that happens in this, because I thought this was like, this is a slow book. This is the book where it's just setting up the characters and they're starting out on their journey, that there's no action in this. I was completely wrong. There's so many pivotal points within the plot that happen in The Fellowship of the Ring that I was just so confused. I was like, I thought this happened in the second book. I thought this happened in the third book. My timeline is just completely off. I'm remembering everything in the complete wrong order, so it was nice to be set straight. But what was really enjoyable for me rereading this as an adult, which I would totally recommend that you do if you've been meaning to reread them at some point, just do it, was the fact that like I never noticed naturally as a child, you don't really do any critical reading, you don't really notice the writing style, you just want to find out what happens at the end of the story because you're reading for fun and you're probably nosy if you're anything like what I was like as a child. But just how wonderfully written these books are. And you know, this series is held to such a high standard that you might think, oh, it's just people overhyping it. It's not. It really is. I don't want to say it's beautiful, but like I do want to say it's beautiful. I really enjoyed it. Even though it took me a good while to read, I did end up cracking the spine on this. I was talking about it in a video earlier this year. I was like, I don't want to crack the spine on it. I had to. These books, these editions are bound way too tightly to just not So I'm planning to read The Two Towers probably in January at some point, and then I'll just finish up the series next year, which I'm really looking forward to do. Because now as an adult, I can say like I officially feel like I've read it. Because you know when you read it as a kid, you're like, did I really read it? Did I skim it? Did I like skip parts? I don't know. Apparently I did, since I was so confused about the bloody timeline. The next book that I picked up was The Greek Myths by Robert Graves. So this has been sitting on my bookshelf for a very long time, unread. And I knew that I'd have to pick it up and just read it all in one go if I wanted to ever actually finish it, because I had started it before and then I put it back down and 4 years passed and nothing had come of it since. But I did read I, Claudius by Robert Graves. I really enjoyed that, and that's actually what spurred me on to pick this up and finally get it read. And I really enjoyed it. I'd say this isn't one for everyone. I'd say if you're really curious about Greek myths, this is great. There were so many of them that I'd never been familiar with before, and then there was a lot of them that I had a different iteration in my head. And what I really liked about this is that it will tell you the myth and then it will tell you the other iterations of it. So while I was reading some of them, I was like, that's not how I ever heard that one. And then it would state like, oh, but people also tell it like this, or people also say that this is what happened. And I was like, it all makes sense now. This was just a really nerdy read for me, and there was a lot to it, but it was really easy actually to get through. There were some standout ones, like I was really pumped to finally read the Icarus one, because like I've always really liked the idea of Icarus and the whole thing of like flying too close to the sun and all that kind of stuff. The stuff about Hercules, I was like, the Zeus stuff is kind of crazy. Just the fact that he's just like I'm making babies with everyone, like babies are popping out of everywhere. There's so much drama to this, and I think that's what I was really looking forward to, that I just love the fact that Robert Graves is able to write in a way that's just, it kind of reminds me of like when you're standing around at work and you're just having a casual gossip about your co-workers. It's the sort of same serotonin release that I get from reading Robert Graves' work. Highly recommend this if you're interested in reading Greek mythology, because it was just, it was so good. I loved it. I got through it so quickly too. I was just delighted with myself that I finally read it, and I was kind of like, you shouldn't have procrastinated this for so long, because it was actually really enjoyable. So the next book that I picked up was in October, and it was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. So I had never seen the film for this. I'd never read this before previously. And I just went in completely blind and really, really enjoyed it. It was interesting because like I have this thing with Neil Gaiman's writing where a lot of the time you're reading one of his stories and it does feel like it's meant to be for a younger audience, but then out of nowhere it will just like hit you with an adult theme. Like I remember reading Stardust and all of a sudden it got a bit saucy and I was like, girl. There was elements to that in this. I found, like, you know, if you're reading this as a child, you're not going to notice it, but as an adult, it's going to make your eyebrow raise a little bit. This is about a young girl named Coraline who's living in this kind of creepy old house that's been split up into apartments. And while she's exploring one day, she finds like a little cupboard area and she ends up going through it and finding that she's in a different dimension. The only difference in this dimension is that her parents seem a lot nicer and they're a lot more attentive towards her, but they also have buttons for eyes, so that's kind of disturbing. There's also a talking cat, which I really enjoyed because we all enjoy a talking sassy cat. I really liked the artwork in this as well. There's like several photos and some of them are quite disturbing looking, and I could imagine myself as a spooky Yuki child like living for this. It worked really well as like a bit of a palate cleanser for myself, but also just to get into the spooky Yuki season. If you've never read it before, it's definitely worth your while checking it out because it's very quick and it's quite fun. Even though I wouldn't naturally gravitate towards reading children's books all that often, this is one that's always just been on my radar as like, I should have read it when I was younger and I haven't and I need to. The next book I read was one that I got out of the library before it closed, and it was the Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, and no bueno. I was so disappointed with this, even though I knew what to be kind of expecting. It fucking sucked, dude. It was awful. I mean, the main thing that sucked about it that I'll tell you about right now is the fact that anytime anything scary happened, anytime there was a haunting or evidence that there'd been a haunting in the house, it was always punctuated by an exclamation mark. And it drove me insane. Like if you're someone like me where you pick out patterns in your reading, it was so tacky. The level of writing I would attribute to the type of journalism you typically find in the National Enquirer. It was just really low level, really trying to like grab a reader's attention, but ultimately they were able to do the reverse, and they just made the story very, very cheap. It was very repetitive in how it described these hauntings, because it would always happen towards the end of a chapter, and then right at the last sentence of the chapter it would be punctuated by an exclamation point. And it was just, it got really irritating to read, because it's like, the thing is, you don't have to try to draw the reader's attention to this. The reader is going to read it, and even if it has a full stop there, that kind of makes it more scary. If you just throw something out there, if you throw something out into the abyss and just let it sit there, that's fine. Like, for example, I'm going to be talking about The Stand in a few minutes, but at the end of one of the chapters, it just states that these two characters are talking, and it says something along the lines of, and behind them a man was coughing. There's no exclamation point. It doesn't try to draw your attention to this, but based on the knowledge you already know of what's happening in the story, that sentence is horrifying. You can let something sit and just roll with it, you know? I think there was only like 2 times that there wasn't an exclamation point used. But yeah, it sucked. It was awful. If you want to read the Amityville Horror just out of curiosity, which is what I read, just be prepared for that. It did have a good premise in the sense of the fact that murders actually did take place in that house. The Defoe murders, like, that was a real story. Whether there was actually a haunting, not so much. What the Lutz family experienced when they moved in is debatable. Whether they just wanted fame and to sensationalize these murders that had happened in their house prior to them living there. Whether there was any sort of haunting or weirdness going on. There's a lot of stuff in the book that's actually been debunked based on the fact of, like, there wasn't snow at this period, so there couldn't have been any footprints left in the snow on this specific date. There's a lot of inconsistencies within it once you read it and then actually look it up. But it is a bit of fun, but just be prepared for the fact that you might be as irritated as me when reading it and reading all those bloody exclamation points. The next book that I read was The Witching Hour by Anne Rice, and when I mentioned this in my autumn TBR, I was saying that I was really hankering some Anne Rice and that I was hoping that this would just kind of scratch that itch, you know? And it did. It was great. I ended up preferring this to The Interview with the Vampire, so I feel like that's setting the bar quite high. So this is about a young woman named Rowan Mayfair, and she's estranged from her family until her estranged mother passes away, and she discovers that she is inheriting the family fortune and the house. So she goes back to New Orleans to discover her history, to really find out who she is. And I loved kind of finding that out with her. Like, that was something that was really kind of motivating me to continue on reading. But we discover that she isn't just an average person. Like, her family history is steeped in witchcraft, and it's not the type of like witchcraft that's like, oh, it's fun and they're happy witches. It's like full on occult witchcraft. So if you're into those sort of themes, definitely check this one out. I will say that there are a lot of gothic elements to this, which is why I really enjoyed it, but there are certain themes that are very dark and it gets quite violent. So if you're more sensitive, the topics of incest, rape and miscarriage do come up. So if you want to steer clear of that, maybe don't check this out. However, aside from all that, like, I really enjoyed how dark it was. I wasn't expecting it to get as brutal as it did in times. It was like very, very severe. But also like just a fascinating read. Like, there's something about Anne Rice's writing that always just captivates me and mesmerizes me. And even though the beginning of this was very slow, like it was very slow, because I just enjoy the flow of her writing, I was able to get through it, and I kind of knew what to come in the story. I knew that there was a reason that I needed to keep reading it. And basically Rowan discovers that her family is cursed. Let's just go with cursed, because a demon has attached itself to her family and he's been like haunting them for generations. His name is Lasher, and he's basically an incubus. So if you know anything about those, yeah, that's basically what this book is about. His character in itself is completely fascinating. And like, at times I was like, shut up, Rowan, I want to learn more about this fella. I don't know how accessible the rest of the series is going to be, because this is the first book in the Mayfair Witches series. If I can get it in the library, I absolutely will. However, I don't have high hopes. So if I can buy it at a certain point, I probably will, but it's not going to be on my to-do list anytime soon. But I do definitely want to read the rest of the series because, like I said, this was far superior to Interview with the Vampire, in my opinion. Around the same time, I also picked up The Complete Tales of Edgar Allan Poe. As I was saying in my autumn TBR, that I wanted to read like 4 or 5 of his short stories during October, and I did manage to do that, and I did film a reading vlog for it, but I haven't edited it yet because like time just went by really quickly, and everyone was just like, the 1st of November struck and everyone was just like putting up Christmas trees. So I did manage to read, I think I read 6 short stories in this, and you know, I haven't read Poe in such a long time that going back to revisit him was just such an enjoyable experience because I never realized how sassy he was. Like there's times where he's just throwing straight up shade. Like in the story Premature Burial, he's talking about a woman who was buried alive, but he throws out like some shady comments about her being like, well, she was so cold in life that no one basically noticed she was still alive when they buried her. And it was so funny to read, and I found that quite a lot throughout some of the stories that I read. I also reread The Pit and the Pendulum because that's like one of my all-time favorites, and I haven't read that since I was like 15. But yeah, super enjoyable. I still have a lot of his stories to get through. I originally wanted to list out all the stories that I haven't read so I could start crossing them off, but I was like, that's a big job. But yeah, I am going to be continuously picking this up over the coming year to re-explore some of his stories and also to read some new ones because it's wonderful. And finally, the last book that I read in recent weeks was The Stand by Stephen King. Now, this, I have to say right off the bat, I've had a really good reading year so far. But this has got to be my new all-time favourite Stephen King novel. I haven't actually rated it on Goodreads yet. I haven't gone on Goodreads for a while because I realised I wasn't going to be able to meet my goal of 50 books because the library shut down. So I've just been like, I've been going on there and like adding people as friends or whatever, but I have just been avoiding the challenge. Like I just put on my blinders. I'm like, it doesn't exist. I'm just going to like not pay attention until I can actually officially admit defeat on like the 30th of December. I don't know whether I should give it 4 stars or 5 stars. I think I need a bit more time to mull it over because I only finished it last week or the week before last. My timing's a bit off. All my days are the same. I'm sorry. Reading this in the midst of a pandemic gave it a whole other perspective and a whole like deeper meaning, and I just found it a lot more scary than it probably would have been. One of my gripes that I have with Stephen King is that usually it's not until the end of the book that things start to get interesting, that there's action and stuff. There'll be like dribs and drabs throughout the novel, but it's not until like the last 30 pages that things really rev up. But with this, it was immediate. So on the very first page, we realize that the superflu has been released. We don't know exactly what it is. We do know where it's coming from, and we see it spread, and it spreads so quickly too. And there's moments in the first couple of chapters, like the first couple of chapters are quite short, which kind of keeps you just motivated to read more. I was finding it really difficult to put the book down initially because I was like, oh, one more chapter isn't going to hurt. And then, you know, one more chapter turns into like another hour or 2 of actually reading, which is always great. No complaints there. But there was moments at the end of chapters where it would talk about like a nurse who was showing symptoms, but because she wasn't really taking it that seriously, or because it could have just been a cold that she was getting, she decided not to report it. And then it was like, as she was walking home, she infected this many people. And you're just like, oh my God, like this is horrifying. It is episodic in nature as each chapter jumps around from character to character. So at first it is hard to get invested in the characters, but once the book is separated into different parts, and once part 2 starts, the chapters get significantly longer and you get more time with each character and you get a real sense of them. And I really enjoyed that aspect. Like one of my favorite characters was a man named Nick, who was deaf and he was also mute, and his analysis of other characters that he came upon was so fascinating. Like if you like psychology and stuff, that was a really interesting thing. But there's so many brutal moments in this. There's also a huge element in this that I had no clue about. Basically, I just had no foresight as to this issue popping up around the superflu, of like how it's going to affect people. And when it initially started, I was like, and the way it was described, I really was like, this book is going to be something completely different to what I thought it was. Like I thought this was just going to be all about a superflu, and then the story of the people who are left, who are forced out of character in order to survive, like the nitty gritty, really harsh reality, real and raw. But when that element was introduced, I was like, I'm not going to like this whatsoever. This is just going to turn into one of those stories. And Do you know what? I was wrong. I ended up really enjoying it. But the thing is, if I'd known about that before I started this, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. I probably would have dismissed it as like, oh, it's one of those types of books. No, thank you. And also initially I was having some issues with trying to understand what was happening in the story. There was like these kind of dream sequences or visions that certain characters were having, and I just wasn't understanding it. And then halfway through the novel, it made perfect sense because there's a huge reference in here. And at first I was so pissed off that I didn't catch it or that I never thought of it. I loved the fact that it did reference. I just love references. I love being in on something. I did get through it quite slowly because I did have a lot of college work to do and I was just neglecting my reading. But once I did get back into it, I was able to finish it up, quickly enough. Like, I read the bulk of this in 2 weeks, so I was pretty happy with that. And I can't recommend it enough. Like, honestly, if you want something that you're going to be glued to, check this out. So that has been my reading wrap up for 2020. I just wanted to kind of tie everything together, as I haven't done a wrap up in such a long time and I feel really cruddy about it. I'm going to get cracking on a couple of standalone reviews that I still have to do. I'm still in college. My last assignment, well, you'll be seeing this probably on Tuesday or Wednesday. My last assignment is due on Monday, so like a day or two ago from when you're seeing this. So then I'm going to be officially on my Christmas break, and I'm going to really enjoy it because this last couple of weeks have been really hellish. It's been really, really stressful trying to get everything done. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Christmas break. I'm looking forward to doing a bit of reading, but mostly I'm just looking forward to catching up on videos and to chatting to you guys because I'm really missing the interaction and stuff. So thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Let me know what you've been reading this year, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.